Welcome to part 2 of Metroid Extravaganza, a video series where I go over the 6 Metroid games within the 2D saga. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, click the card above to watch that first. Otherwise, it's on to part 2 and the dreaded Metroid Other M. Okay, now before I defend this game just a little bit, I will say this. I remembered this game being so much better. Back when it released in 2010, I would even say I enjoyed it, finding it to be quite unique and an interesting direction for the series. Jump forward to 2022 though, and I quickly realised that, without a doubt, this is by far the worst Metroid game. I include Metroid Prime Federation Force in that statement, a game that I actually thoroughly enjoyed with another person. Metroid Other M was an attempt from Ninja Gaiden developers Team Ninja to make a mix of 2D Metroid with 3D action gameplay into one coherent game. They had quite a lot of successes with their design, but sadly they had just as many, if not more, absolute failures. If you've heard of this game, you probably know of some of its issues already. For example, the story is in some ways quite deep, with the first Metroid game to have full voice acting, very well animated CGI cutscenes, and some high production value regular cutscenes spread throughout the game. The problem is the voice actors seem to have little to no direction for the whole game, resulting in very monotone voices. And the story is pretty damn poor. The game starts off with Samus and a team of soldiers going to a space station called the Bottle Ship, where multiple bioweapons have been created using the DNA of what was remaining of the baby Metroid. Beyond that, there's not really too much depth to the story, and the plot just gets silly in places, with constant fake-outs throughout. There is a somewhat interesting take on Ridley, but it leads to an underwhelming boss fight and probably the most hated part of the entire franchise. The poor story seriously makes the game drag, and although the animations and cutscenes were well made, the story just becomes annoying at points, and overall does not suit Samus's character seen in previous games. Speaking of Samus though, the design of her suit is in my opinion pretty damn good. Much sleeker and more agile than previous games, giving a slightly more realistic design. Sadly though, Samus herself has little to no personality, and although is a badass in some ways, especially in her fighting style and sheer movement speed, it is ruined by her now much more submissive and non-combative attitude. This is made even worse by the flashbacks that show her as a more rebellious person who was against authority. Whereas in the actual game, she literally won't activate her life-saving heat protection on her suit unless the boss man tells her to. There is also an infamous scene where for some reason Samus suddenly has PTSD from seeing Ridley return, and goes on to get absolutely destroyed by him before being saved by a man with a big gun. Why does Samus now have PTSD despite the fact canonically she's defeated Ridley several times? And considering Fusion is the next in the storyline, we'll soon do it again. Samus goes from being a powerful, kick-ass character in every previous game, to then constantly going on about the baby Metroid in this one, and doing exactly what she's told at all times from her boss Adam Malkovich. And even having to be saved by his team of soldiers on a regular basis. That is just the faults of the story. Gameplay-wise, this game brings in so many good design choices. The fastest movement speed yet, the ability to attack enemies up close with context-sensitive situations, with unique animations for almost every enemy in the game. But a lot of this is ruined by a heavy reliance on Samus's charge beam to do any real damage, and it charges painfully slow for most of the game. Rockets can only be used in first person, making them pretty much useless in most battle situations. And basically no other weapons appear in the game to try and mix things up a bit. On the positive side, the game does bring in shine sparking again, which wasn't used much in the previous games, and does go on to be used and perfected heavily in Metroid Dread. But Other M also restricts most of Samus's more exciting abilities until towards the end of the game, and makes most of the level design very dull to explore, on top of them just generally looking dull throughout the game. Health is no longer collected from fighting enemies either, but only recharged by holding the Wii Remote up and holding A while on critical health, or by reaching a save point. This completely ruins the purpose of killing enemies repeatedly. Now they are just an obstacle that you are better off running past unless you have to fight. This brings us on to the most egregious design choice of all. The entire game, this fully 3D game, is controlled with a fucking D-pad with the Wii remote on its side. Who the hell thought that was a good idea? Nintendo, the company that literally pioneered the analog stick for movement in a 3D space over a decade before this game's release, forced players to play the first third-person 3D Metroid game with a D-pad. This hurt the game massively and makes it awkward to play, and Samus's movements just look clunky and stilted through her animations. This, amongst the things already said and more, solidifies Metroid Other M as the current and likely worst Metroid game forever. And yet, there are some interesting ideas, such as being able to switch to first-person mode by pointing at the screen. It wasn't done hugely well, but it was an interesting idea regardless. The idea of a cinematic, story-driven Metroid was also a strong idea. If only the writing was way better, and they kept Samus's character more powerful. Overall, Other M is an ambitious, unique Metroid game that sadly just doesn't stick the landing. I feel it could have worked. With better writers and overall better design choices, it could have been regarded as a new direction for the series. But as it stands, it's a very flawed game that, although still worth playing, is definitely the worst in the franchise. And also, it doesn't have too much importance to the whole of the Metroid storyline. You can pretty much skip this game. Metroid Fusion, however, is one of the best. This is where the whole franchise started for me. Metroid Fusion was not only my first Metroid game, but it was also my first Game Boy Advance game. Releasing back in 2002 on the same day as Metroid Prime, this was considered the golden day of the Metroid franchise. Both its future and its continuation of its history were on display across these two fantastic games. Both received critical and fan praise on release, and continued praise since. Fusion is the fourth 2D Metroid game and continues the story on from Super Metroid and kind of Other M. Samus returns to SR-388 to help the Biologic Space Laboratory explore the planet. On arrival, Samus is attacked by an organism known as the X-Parasite. Samus seems fine at first, but soon loses consciousness while flying her ship and crashes into an asteroid. The BSL station she was protecting recovers her body, and scientists save her using a vaccine derived from the baby Metroid saved in Metroid 2. In the process of removing the X-Parasite though, Samus loses most of her suit, and gains the weakness to the cold that the Metroids have. After recovering, she discovers the BSL ship is under attack by an X-Parasite, one that has taken on the form of her Varia suit and is destroying the ship. From the get-go, this story is really interesting and hooked me in 20 years ago. In my opinion, it's one of the most in-depth stories of the series. Samus's ship AI, named Adam, plays an integral role throughout the game, being both a guide for the player and an emotional connection for Samus, as it is revealed later in the game that the ship AI is a copy of Adam Malkovich's consciousness, her mentor from the Galactic Federation, who you see in Other M. Gameplay-wise, this game changed the slower, more tank-like movements of Super Metroid and made Samus a faster and more agile character. This fits in well with the story of her losing most of her bulky Varia suit and makes the game more focused around speed and acrobatic platforming. This is true of the combat as well, with much more widespread weapons and a faster way to switch between rockets and other tools than Super Metroid. The developers seem to be aiming for the smoothest gameplay for Metroid yet. This is also the first game to use the ledge grab mechanic seen in the later games, and is used to add a few extra layers to the platforming by allowing you to shoot while holding ledges, and allows for more verticality in the level design. Fusion also changed some of the fundamental design of the previous games, by making the map layout a lot more straightforward and providing the most guidance of any of the games in the series. The ship is broken up into several sectors, and when you reach each area, you are given a waypoint to always give you an idea of where you need to go. However, in most cases these locations are locked behind security doors that you have to find another room to unlock, and you get no guidance as to where that is. This slightly more guided style may have put off some of the old school Metroid players, but I think it was actually a really clever design for a franchise that had been dormant for several years. Between the mid-90s and the early 2000s, the range of people who played video games had drastically changed, bringing in a lot more casual gamers thanks to the success of the PlayStation consoles and the continued success of the Game Boy systems. As such, getting as many people as possible into a franchise as hardcore as Metroid would have been difficult if there was no guidance at all. So so the designers made the smart decision to give players some guidance, the most in the series in fact, but still not tell them exactly where to go at all times. This encourages exploration and experimentation for players to learn the style and mechanics of the Metroid franchise, and, in turn, hopefully convince them to play the other games in the series. For me, this worked wonderfully. This being my first Metroid game, it was important that it was easy enough, but intelligent enough to be enjoyable. With fantastic bosses, world design, story, and overall gameplay, Fusion will always be my favourite Metroid game. That was until, of course, we finally got the game that had been missing for nearly 20 years. Made by Mercury Steam, the same developers of the Metroid 2 remake, it takes a franchise that hadn't had an original title in nearly 20 years, and not only meets the expectations set on it, but absolutely smashes them. When the game was announced at E3 2021, excitement was high. The name alone, Metroid Dread, got fans extremely excited, as the title had been long rumoured and even discussed by Nintendo since 2005. After a couple of months though, some fans started to get a little unsettled. Nintendo was heavily promoting the game, but people felt that the developer wouldn't be able to pull it off. A game nearly 2 decades in anticipation, being handled by a team with a questionable history with the Castlevania series and the good, but arguably not great Metroid 2 remake, made some people uneasy. Come release day though, in October 2021, and all of those worries were cleared away in an instant. Mercury Steam had done it. Not only had they made one of, if not the best Metroid game, but also one of the best games of the generation. This game plays incredibly well. The feeling of speed felt in Metroid Fusion, Metroid 2 Remake, and Other M had finally been perfected, giving this game the best movement and gameplay pacing of any in the series. They have also finally perfected Samus's wall jump. Something that was always slightly awkward to do in previous games is now super responsive and becomes a widely used mechanic of the overall movement and navigation of the world. Aiming is also incredibly smooth, bringing over the 360-degree aiming of the Metroid 2 remake, while now allowing angled aiming while running. Admittedly, I still wish there was a button to guarantee the angle like in previous games. With how many buttons have to be in use throughout this game, I'll give it a pass, as Samus's arsenal of equipment available in this adds even more to the fast pacing of the movement. The speed booster is used to its fullest in this game as well, by utilising shine sparking in creative and frankly crazy ways across multiple screens and rooms. It's genius, ending up in difficult but enjoyable puzzles like this. It gives the best puzzles to find upgrades in the series yet. On top of this, the new sliding mechanic allows Samus to slide through small gaps with ease, speeding up what used to be slow morph ball segments and making them feel more smooth and dynamic. The morph ball does of course make a return here as well, and even the simplicity of making the switch at the press of a single button rather than having to double tap down makes the pacing of Samus's movement so much more enjoyable. This all ties back into the combat as well, with some of the most difficult but again most enjoyable bosses in the franchise's history, especially the Kraid boss fight and final battle of the game. Not once did the fights become frustrating, they were always a perfect balance of difficulty and enjoyment. In fact, all of the bosses in the game strike that balance perfectly, and each one is unique and memorable to fight, with wonderfully crafted cutscenes and animations to go along with each. And amazingly, even sequence-breaking rewards, such as getting the bombs before reaching Kraid, something that is not easily done, will get you a unique one-shot kill animation. In a final word on the gameplay, it all just comes together so incredibly well to create by far the best playing Metroid game ever. Hell, I'd go as far as to say one of the best playing games ever made. It's just that damn smooth, and thanks to the incredibly well designed map, you rarely get lost, but also never feel like you're having your hand held. You can always naturally find your way forward. This may not be the case for some of the new Metroid players, but for longtime fans like myself, you always know what clues to look for. All of this, and I haven't even mentioned one of the biggest parts of the game, the enemy units. These unstoppable literal killing machines will chase you down in different ways throughout the game in set areas. If one catches up to you, you have about a half-second window that randomly changes its timing to try and save yourself. Otherwise, it's instant death every single time. 7 enemies appear throughout the game that you must avoid by using multiple of Samus's abilities and her speed to survive. Each encounter is intense, and thanks to impressive AI, they are very proficient at hunting you down or cutting off your escape routes. It has a horror-like feel to it, and although some players say they found it repetitive, I found that they were spaced out enough throughout the game to never become dull or outstay their welcome. Plus, each one had enough unique mechanics and a satisfying conclusion to make them worth the dread that they ensue. So, that's the gameplay. What about the graphics and story? Well, the graphics speak for themselves. Genuinely one of the best looking games on the Switch, and one of the best looking 2D games available in general. With amazing animations, lighting, and character models, the whole game just oozes quality throughout. It shows it had a strong budget and a dedicated team to work on it. The story then, well, I would say once again, it's one of the best in the series. This game is the final part in the 2D Metroid saga that started with the 1986 original. It's a more personal story about Samus, digging further into the lore of the Chozo, her own past, and the purpose of the X-Parasite and the Metroids. I won't go into any further detail than that, but what is also done perfectly here is Samus's character. Metroid Other M tried to make Samus a deeper character through hammy and overwritten dialogue, and way too much reliance on other characters to try and humanize her. Whereas this game gives us the Samus that everyone wanted, a badass bounty hunter who is clearly very skilled at what she does. She's confident, she's powerful, and afraid of nothing. Her composure during boss fights and cutscenes, her determination when taking on foes more powerful than herself, and so much more speak volumes. Especially when you consider she has no dialogue in the whole game, bar one line that's in the Chozo language. Mercury Steam really showed how well they could write a silent character, and alongside Yoshio Sakamoto, the creator of the series, they were able to bring the saga of the Metroid franchise to a satisfying and awesome conclusion. The only area that is a slight letdown in the game is the music. Whereas the rest of the series has had very memorable music throughout most of them, the music in Metroid Dread more just blends in with the background, never really standing out in a good or a bad way. Which is a shame, when Super Metroid especially had very memorable and catchy tunes. Overall though, Metroid Dread is a fucking masterpiece. In my opinion, it is the best in the series. I played this game through from start to finish in about a week. Never becoming bored, never dropping off like I did with the other games in the franchise. The quality of its production and the overall amazing gameplay is damn near perfect, and brings the series to a new standard. The future of the 2D Metroid series looks strong with Mercury Steam at the helm. Well, that's all of the 2D Metroid Saga games, from Metroid Zero Mission through to Metroid 2, Super Metroid, Other M, Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Dread. This series is one of the most consistently strong and fun to play in the whole industry. With remakes of its first two games to bring them up to more modern standards, and even its oldest game, Super Metroid, still feeling great to play nearly 30 years later. It looks like each of these games will stay as classics for decades to come. Except Other M, of course. I highly urge anyone to try out these games and support this franchise, because despite their high quality and high ratings, the games are often overlooked, and the franchise doesn't sell anywhere near as much as the Mario and Zelda series. Without a doubt though, they deserve just as much high regard and attention as those two, and it's one of the most enjoyable and unique franchises ever made. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Phil and I'm the creator of the Pixel Tavern. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please click the like button, subscribe to the Pixel Tavern, and click the bell icon to be alerted of any new videos I release. If you enjoyed this video, there are, as always, more videos on screen now. Until the next video everyone, thank you very much for watching.